Hi and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Realism binti Hayazi and this is my groupmate Suhami bin Azmi, Muhammad Abi Awas bin Abdul Kafar, Muhammad Shukri bin Shahdan, Sufadli bin Ibrahim and Natasha Azira Yusha binti Jainun. Now we want to talk about realism theory in international relations. Hi, I'm Haizatul. Now I want to present my part, which is the introduction. What is realism? The term realism used to refer to a systematic method of thought with specific principle that was diametrically opposed to all form of subjectivism and idealism. This is no longer the situation at the moment. This word has faded into a foggy cloud of the ambiguity in contemporary philosophical usage, in which nothing especially clear to or distinct can be discriminated. This tendency is shared by all schools of contemporary thinking, including those that have embraced the term in some way to characterize their own perspective. The first reason inception is that the nation state, often abbreviated to state, is the primary player in international relations. Other bodies, such as person and organization, exist, but their influence is limited. The The roots of realism are claimed to be founded in the sum of history, earliest book, particularly Thucydides' narrative of the Peloponnese War, which is found between 431 and 404 BCE. Thucydides was not a realist when he wrote over 2,000 years ago, because IR theory did not exist in the name form until the 20th century. However, when seen from a modern perspective, researchers discover many similarities between Essenes and fundamental methods and behaviors. Principles of the realism have a six. Number one is a political realism, a hold that politics is regulated by objective rules that have their own origins in human nature. The concept of interest are articulated in terms of power, which is infuse regional order into the subject matter of politics, and so allow for theoretical knowledge of politics is the main signpost of political realism. Third, realism assumes that interest, defined as power, is an objective category that is universally valid but does not have a set meaning. Fourth, political realism recognizes the moral importance of political activity. Fifth, political realism refuses to accuse a nation moral goals with the moral rules that govern the cosmos. Lastly, the political realism defends the political sphere as autonomy. How does this policy affect the power of the nation? Political realism is founded on a politics view of human nature. In addition, realism tries to go beyond realism state centuries by focusing on human nature's global honesty, interconnectedness, and instant communication. It sees a number of non-state players as vital in shaping the global system, including by collective entities, international organizations, and multinational companies, overcoming the gap between restrictive ideas of state sovereignty and international norms that shift the focus to individual security in one of the most difficult foreign policy tasks.
There are two branches of realism, which are classical and neorealism. Neorealism are divided into two, which are offensive and defensive. First, classical realism holds that human nature serves as important roles as an informative black box that guides the behavior of individual and the state, even if its exact properties and operation are difficult to explain. Realist scholars would argue that human nature is negative and its bad effects are largely unavoidable. Second, human nature is whatever the dominant disclosure decide it to be is nothing than a result or consequences or power that it present everywhere at a very given moment in time. There are three core neuralism assumptions can be identified. Firstly, states are regarded as the primary player operating in a rational, utility maximized manner, and the other players such as international organizations and multinational companies are acknowledged by neoliberalism. Second is the international system is anarchy as the result. The national interest is to maximize authority in order to preserve the existence of the state. The specific dominant structure of nature is thus immaterial to neoliberalism. Third, the distribution of economic and military capability viewed as a systemic element is the most significant exploratory variable. In terms of offensive realism, that when the five assumptions are wedded together, they provide enormous incentive for the great power to think and behave offensively with reference to each other. In other words, nations are always competing for domination because the greatest power offers maximum security. Next, defensive realism. Defensive realism contends that nations pursue power in order to maximize their safety. However, because a balance of power provides peaceful stability, nation will prioritize preserving a balance of power occurring. Every increasing sum of power is not a goal and of itself. It pays attention to the potential importance of shared value by state, supporting a peaceful balance of power as well as the importance of unit level element in addition to the division of power capability.
Hi and Assalamualaikum. I'm Zulfadli bin Ibrahim with metric number 2021171101. So I will cover on analysis of the theory and two main points that I want to share today is one using a realist data analysis approach and secondly using the finding from realist evaluation. First, using a realist data analysis approach. Realist data analysis approach is driven by the principle of realism, which explain change brought about by an intervention by referring to the actors who act and change a situation under specific condition and external events. Realists frequently said that they are inspired by a long history of political philosophy. The great writers Thucydides, Nicole Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Max Weber are among those frequently mentioned by realists. Secondly, using the finding from realist evaluation, MRTs are the most useful for realist evaluation as they are specific enough to generate proposition and generate enough to apply across different situations. Realist evaluation use generative causality to explain complex processes, allowing decision makers to assess whether interventions are successful in different contexts and to adapt intervention to suit specific contexts. Realist contend that to advance their respective national interests, government must eventually rely on their own resources or power within an anarchic international system. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and good day to Sir Ahmad Shah. My name is Natasha Azira Yusha. My student ID is 2021517419. So I will continue on the analysis on the theory. Developing the initial program theory. Realist evaluation is program theory-based evaluation approach that tests and refines the program theory to determine whether and how the intervention works. It specifies what mechanisms will generate outcomes and what features of the context will affect them. The elements are made explicit at the evaluation design stage. Neuralism, which is most often associated with the American political scientist Kenneth Waltz, was an effort to adapt some of the most important ideas of classical realism to the terminology and research methods of contemporary social science. Waltz stated in the Theory of International Politics 1979 that the anarchical nature of the international system alone could account for the majority of significant aspects of international relations, particularly the actions of great powers. Watt's viewpoint was not novel, but by systematizing it and striving to support it with evidence, he simultaneously gave realism new life and further distance from its classical foundations. So the last one is choosing the evaluation methods. Realist evaluation is method neutral and use both quantitative and qualitative data to test the initial program theory in all its dimensions. In research, methodologies acknowledge this diversity of approaches and do not seek to advance a single strategy or technique for the industry. Nevertheless, the same standards needed in the social science should be applied to IR research methodologies. This enables a consistent methodology. This rigorously questions research methodologies even in the setting of the various research goals that change in the response to quick shifts and continuous policy discussion that are a hallmark of our quickly changing field of study and practice. Researchers use a wide variety of research methodologies in both scholarship and practice as a result of the different methodological traditions in international relations. Unlike academic disciplines like anthropology, which rely on the fundamental technique like ethnography and group observation, international relations has adopted research technique from a variety of disciplines including anthropology, economics, law, political science and sociology. Thus, a requirement for academic or policy literacy is knowledge of a wide range of social science methodologies. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hello and Assalamualaikum. So my name is Mohamed Shukri bin Shadan. I will explain about the impacts realism theory in international relations. So for the first point, the impact is realists view every nation as a sovereign state. So for this point, as we know, the impact that arises as a result of this ideology of realism is considers each country as a sovereign entity. It also highlights how each nation has the right to govern itself as a rational partner in international affairs. So this is happened because there are countries that have the power to support the recognition of a country. And second point is realism in international affairs is that it stimulates a lot of discussion. Besides to considering each country as a sovereign entity, the effect of realism is to provide a lot of conversation in international relations. In these situations, it contributes to an interesting explanation of the pervasive nature of war, in multinational societies. This is also the ideological impact of realism in international relations. Next, combined strategies can generate security assurance. In addition, the combined strategy is also an impact of the ideology of realism applied in international relations. This arises because the combined strategy is able to create a security guarantee for a weak country against cooperation formed with a strong country that has a stable source of power. For countries that practice realism in the sense that they are weak countries, they really need this merger because their balance of power can be achieved through these ways. And the last point for impact is realism, protecting the interests of a country. We can identify from this ideology of realism is the model of belief in protecting the interests of country. It has influenced the feminism model via identifying the roles of women in the politics of international relations. It is proof that most aspects of international relations are socially constructed. Thank you.
Hi sir, just for your information, since I am the last presenter, I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Mohamed bin Azmi and my metric number is 2021729997. For the next part, I will explain more about the summary of realism theory in international relations. Let's begin with the summary. Point number 1 is about realism is the theory where realists usually possess a skeptical perspective of the odds of major systemic reform. Basically, there are four main ideas in realism, which are classical realism, neo-realism, offensive realism, and defensive. Point number 2 is about in classical realism, the behavior in both people and countries is heavily dictated by the nature of people, which contributes to a critical part of an explanatory black box. Point number 3, realism emphasizes power and security, while liberalism emphasizes cooperation and interdependence. Number 4, realism has had a significant influence on feminism by highlighting the importance of women in international politics. In here, the model emphasizes the need to protect national interests, which includes recognizing the importance of women in safeguarding those interests, which has resulted in increased attention to the roles of women in foreign policy decision-making, such as higher representation in peace negotiations, diplomatic negotiations, and international organizations. Last point is, realism has also pushed for greater respect for women's rights and gender equity in foreign policy as part of feminist advocacy and an effort to create a more equal world. Next part, I will explain about the conclusion of realism theory in international relations. Without wasting our time, we jump to the last part, which is conclusion. Realism is widely accepted because, point number 1, it gives a more realistic and practical approach as compared to liberalism to understand IR, as described by Karen Rolf Adams. Point number 2, it gives us a true picture of events and make clear the ground realities as US attack and policies about Iraq. Point number 3, it gives complete description and explanation of international events. 4, it helps in predicting human nature and behavior, which helps in predicting possible outcomes of cooperation among states. Normally, it is near to the reality. Number 5, hypothetical approach is very applicable. And the last point is, it can describe the great game on international level among superpower and can predict war and peace. That's all from us, Group 5, sir. Thank you. If you have any question, please don't be hesitate to contact us via email and number above.